All right, folks, we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome. I'm Matt Kinsman. I'd like to welcome you to the AMP Network webinar, Accelerating Your First-Party Data Capture and Content Monetization. We've got a great presentation today filled with examples of how publishers are really approaching maybe the hottest opportunity in media right now, which is what do you do with your first-party data? But first, I just want to go over some housekeeping. Attendees, you're currently in a listen-only mode, but you can submit questions at any time via the Q&A tab on your toolbar. We'll address those questions at the end of the presentation. This session is being recorded, and we're going to send out a replay to all registrants later today. Before we get started, I just want to go over a few upcoming events. We have a packed month coming up at AMP Network. We've got a lot of different ways, a lot of different formats for you to engage with both us and your peers. September 29th, we kick off our new mentor program featuring Lucy Swedberg, the executive editor of Harvard Business Review. You're going to be able to talk to Lucy directly. She's going to share just some best practices and lessons learned from her career. And again, this is a chance for you to really interact one-on-one with leaders in the industry. October 1st, we've got a Slack chat where I'll be online. Jen Smith, who runs the AMP association side, she's going to be on as well, and you can ask us questions about the new associations, how you can get involved, what are some of our offerings, what are some of our plans for the upcoming year. October 14th, we've got a webinar on hybrid event models, which unfortunately are coming back into vogue. October 21st, our Revenue Council, we're going to be meeting talking about the digital advertising boom that we're seeing in B2B media. There's been more money spent on the B2B sector in the last year than at any other time in history, according to eMarketer. We're going to get into a little more about what publishers are doing. TechTarget is going to be joining us, talking a little bit about what they're doing as well, how they're handling the demise of cookies and where we go from there. So that's going to be a conversation format, and we hope you and your colleagues can join us. And then finally, on October 28th, we've got a webinar on how to audit your company's data IQ, which might be a nice complement to our session today. As mentioned, what we do with our first-party data is really one of the biggest opportunities for publishers of all sizes right now. And this really allows us to take back the power from social media and also third-party data platforms. But how we get that data, and most of all, how we really make it actionable, it's one of the biggest challenges that we continue to face. Today, we're thrilled to welcome David Fortino, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at Netline, which is a leader in performance-based lead generation, who's going to really talk about how publishers are successfully capturing first-party data and then helping turn audience development from cost center to profit center. With that, David, please take it away.
Sure thing. Thanks, Matt. Great intro there, and looking forward to a few of those sessions as well. So what we'll do here is, as Matt alluded to, right, this notion that we need to be investing into the capture of first-party data is well documented. So I'm not going to cover too much ground there, other than that needs to be your point of reference for a lot of what we're talking about, and the examples that we'll be covering through some case studies throughout the session. But first-party data capture really, I've seen a lot of attempts, and it's really just mired into email address capture. By doing that, you're putting yourself in a hole that requires a ton of additional legs and steps before getting it to a monetizable event. So the underlying tone that you're going to experience throughout this session is, what if first-party data capture could happen faster than it's ever happened before, and simultaneously be a monetized event at that moment, versus the age-old conclusion of capturing data or asking users to give it, capturing what you can, and then hoping to monetize that user somewhere down the road. So with that said, what we'll need to do is first kind of take a look backwards. And so that's the slide, and really understand how we got to where we're at, right? So the beginning of the internet, it was all about creating web pages. This is the first one, by the way. So if anyone ever wants to hit me up on the side, you get some free Netline swag. If you can name what website this is and who created this site, first site in existence. And so from that point forward, there was one common conclusion, which was if I'm a website operator, I'm going to try to fire CTAs in front of my audience, whether it's asking them to register for a newsletter, asking them to complete a survey, to register for a forum, to make a purchase, whatever it might be. What happens there, though, is that this user dime, unintentional to all of us at that time, but still unfortunately concurrently happening today, is every website has built basically their own isolated chamber of data where users need to register for that site and register for this site and so on and so on and so on. And if that site, God forbid, might have two different types of content, a webinar and an ebook, they're probably going to have to register differently versus how they would subscribe to a magazine. And so you start thinking about that, and you think about the decades of data, the billions or trillions of data points that have been processed. And what happens is you've forced users to go through every single site, every single type of content format that you presented. You've asked users to create another account. So we're getting to this point, this moment in our history where the world is kind of course correcting, not only about first-party data use and how users are treated, but the misuse of first-party data because of the fact that all of these data silos have been created and created and created. Largely, unfortunately, created with the right motivations, and then sometimes after the fact used with the wrong motivations, right? And that's why we're getting governmental overstepping into the industry. You're getting browsers really course correcting what can be done with third-party data. But again, this session's not really to cover all of that because that is real. The session's to cover about what you can do as a B2B media company to gain control of concrete first-party data and turn that data into a monetizable event today. And so what we're going to take a look at here, sorry for the mouse pausing, is acknowledge, right? Your users have had enough. So in addition to the world course correcting, saying, well, if the government's got to get involved and big ad tech's got to get involved, clearly users are upset as well. Why force a user every single site that they go to and every single form that they go to retype information that they already provided you? There's nothing more aggravating than receiving an email from a publisher, driving you to a landing page, and then that same publisher asking you for your email address. You already knew that. And so there's a million ways to actually streamline that through good use of technology, but a little bit of common sense as well. And so you have to ask yourself, is this acceptable behavior? Not only for users to go through, but for your company to be projecting to the marketplace. Today, we're going to cover a number of examples of publishers who thought otherwise, right? And they thought that things should be handled differently. Users deserve better. And so what we're going to do is walk through a story. We're going to walk through the exploration of 5 specific organizations, their pain points, their journey to addressing those pain points, and ultimately the solutions that they found. These publishers come from all different industries. They had different use cases, different content types. They certainly covered different verticals. Yet there's one common solution. And that one common solution is really, really easy to deploy. Prior to talking about the actual case study elements here and getting into the specifics, let's just look at the facts as to how all of this works and what publishers are tapping into to effectively help accelerate that first-party data capture and make that first-party data capture not only actionable, but monetizable immediately. So they're tapping into 62 million user profiles with 35 million different filtering options, covering 14,000 pieces of content that they've loaded. And they've launched a little bit shy of 3,000 campaigns that have netted out to 71% of their audiences being automatically recognized, translating into 60% less typing for their audience. So those 62 million profiles, think of it this way, before we get into this QuestX journey, is up until now, a QuestX user database or any publisher, Wall Street Journal, wouldn't matter, that user database sat in its own universe, right? It didn't speak to any other website's user database. There was no commonality, even though quite likely the users that registered for a certain QuestX property or a Wall Street Journal newsletter, there's certainly going to be cross-pollination. But that user has no easy way of onboarding their first-party and fully permissioned data to each of those sites, or actually independent of those sites and in additional sites. And so what we've done from our side is provided publishers with a single sign-on passwordless registration stack that layers across the entire B2B web. And so it makes the ability for users to engage with any type of content super seamless. It's white labeled, it's completely lean. And the goal is obvious, right? It's not about just giving a great user experience. That helps and that's nice and helps us all sleep better at night. But the reality is that without making it easy for users to register, and the knowledge that first-party data has continuously and historically been abused, people are pessimistic around why should they give you their first-party data today versus why or when they should have done that in the past. And so making it super simple allows some of that fear to go away. It also allows them that commonality to that pervasive user experience that they're seeing across the B2B publishing web. And so we'll dive into some of these examples. This first one's QuestX. And so prior to them coming aboard, and hey, Kate, Paul, Rhonda, how's everybody doing? I just wanted to acknowledge kind of where they were, right? They were a system certainly focused on first-party data capture largely from their fierce properties. They did that well. The one challenge there is that all of the forms were statically built and they statically were managed as well. So each form lacked the ability to dynamically predict any data sets, dynamically correct data sets. Excuse me, there were no structured data sets or schemas behind the scenes, and a lot of that can be up for client influence as well. So what you get to at some point is a massive universe of unstructured data, which if you're a data company or a media company priding itself on data as your asset, the moment your database is starting to skew towards an unstructured fashion is the moment that you're becoming more and more worth less. If you can't query that data in a consistent, structured manner, it becomes very, very hard to actionize that data. From there, they lack the ability to actually have a true campaign management interface. This is about rules-based systems around what leads are good, what leads are not, how leads get routed downstream to a client, which ones don't, third-party APIs, and so on, all without developers. And then lastly, and this will be a really common one throughout all of these, is that first-party data capture is just part of the hurdle, right? The goal here is always to extract revenue in a scalable and efficient manner that felt equitable to your audience at that specific touch point. It's not about this old idea where audience development is a cost center, and I hope to get data in, and I hope to get some of that to my client, and I hope to sell that user on something down the road. Why can't that happen at that moment? The answer is it can, and we'll get into that in a moment. So after deployment, QuestX is effectively tapped into that the industry's first single sign-on passwordless registration stack. It goes across all of their properties. The net result is they're dramatically accelerating their first-party data capture, which leads to an increase in engagement to all gated content types and formats. But as a byproduct of that, their incremental revenue streams have lifted as well. And I'll quantify that for you in a moment. Beyond that, you're getting away from all the unstructured data messiness that existed ages ago into a very structured data environment where there's a clear correlation between job level and job area and taxonomies within each, industries, sub-industries, company sizes, annualized revenues, and so on. All of that's done at the system level and compartmentalized there. We already spoke about unstructured data and what that means. Clearly, QuestX is on a great path. And so when we try to quantify what that means, what you're looking at here is a screenshot of one of their resource libraries, which is built on NetLine stack, but it doesn't really matter. It's completely white labeled, so you never know. But the users who are engaging with this content, 42% of those users are automatically recognized. They don't have to type anything. They click on that more info button. It takes them to the form. Everything's already completed. They just need to confirm that they're on their way. It's kind of like Amazon's one-click checkout idea, but for B2B content. 50% of their audience are receiving enriched predictive prefills. What that means is that we knew something about that user. We just didn't know that user, him or herself, yet. And so it's most likely that we knew their company domain, their IP address, their industry, their sub-industry, their company size, and so on. All of those still really important fields for you and for your clients. But we didn't need to ask the user those fields. They disappeared directly off the form. The user doesn't see it. They don't even know that that occurred. So there's just less fields for the user to complete. Obviously, conversion rates increase, abandonment rates decrease. The byproduct here, the most exciting one, is beyond the 92% of their audience receiving some form of an optimized registration experience, is that 28% of those people immediately monetize by selecting additional Netline-powered content. And that, again, is really similar if you're familiar with Amazon's checkout logic. Let's say you put a television in your cart, and right about as you're going to check out, Amazon says, hey, people who buy this television also tend to buy this surround sound system. We've done that same exact idea for B2B content in a white labeled fashion, completely seamless to the user and to the publisher, and there's a revenue share component to that. So right off the bat, QuestX in this case is monetizing 28% of their audience as those users are engaging with their own gated content. And this is going to be a narrative that you're seeing again and again through this session, is that publishers have effectively taken a highly accelerated way of capturing data, making it lean for their users, and simultaneously making it more lucrative for them to actually capture that data, because there translates into incremental content selections from that exact audience. IEEE is another one, completely different industry, different use cases as well. So they did lack a single point of truth from a registration integrity perspective. Again, there were a lot of data silos for different types of structured data sets, which is good, and I get that, and there's always a legacy reason for doing that. That said, they really lacked a common user experience for their own audience when those users wanted to register for a given piece of content. So if they were registering for a webinar, they'd be given one experience. If they were registering for a white paper, they'd be given another one. More often than not, they were housed inside an On24 experience, which is more akin to a webinar or a virtual event platform. And we're super close with On24 from an API and a co-marketing perspective. Yet a lot of the front-end form capabilities, dynamic pre-filling, populating, and all of that, it just isn't a core capability of their technology. And so what if you flip that on the head and said, well, if we could just capture all the right data up front and send the users where they need to be versus where I have to send them right now, doesn't everyone win, right? Aren't we giving users a better user experience? Aren't we delivering greater value to our clients and or our speakers as part of participating in some of these events? And then aren't we working more efficiently and more intelligently moving forward? That last bullet on the before side about manually delivering leads is something pervasive around the industry. For some reason, a lot of folks are married to busy work. I don't get it. You shouldn't be, if you are an organization that's fixated on doing manual tasks again and again and again, start challenging that, because I think the more often that you can challenge that underlying thought process, the better off you are, not only as an organization, but your personal career path will be rewarded for really trying to pay attention to how you as a company can start thinking smarter and not just consistently doing manual things repeatedly. And so on the after side, they've consolidated all of their gated content behind a Netline powered form. It's white labeled, users can't tell Netline's doing any of this. All that data, if it's a webinar, is being fed into On24 by an API. The ad ops side of things, this one's big, and some publishers don't leverage this capability, but it's completely free. But the system kicks out an XML feed, meaning the moment their team builds one of these campaigns, not only the form and the landing page and native ad units are created on the fly, but there's an XML feed that can dynamically parse and ingest all of that content from their own clients directly back into their CMS, even into their email newsletters, however they see fit. They control the entire user experience, the look and feel, the design aesthetic, and so on. We're just the engine behind that. The beauty there is there's no humans. There's no emails making phone calls. There's no emails being sent. There's no instant messengers or team notes, anything like that, or Slacks. It just happens. And so talk about regaining time and focusing on things of importance versus manual tasks, and that's a great example. Automating lead fulfillment to clients, that's something, again, it just happens, right? By building the campaign, they're regaining all of that time. They don't need to remember to email a client. It just dynamically does it. And that revenue stream again, right? So this was a company that had no focus on trying to monetize gated experiences. And so their reality, similar to QuestX, is that 41% of all of their users were automatically recognized for zero typing. Super seamless and frictionless access to amazing resources. 55% of their audience received an enriched profile, meaning partial profile, where the user had to do a little bit of typing. That 26% of their audience immediately monetized. Again, that checkout idea, right? They picked other content that was made available to them by Netline's audience target algorithm, which is nothing more than a matchmaker of first-party data to available content that's on the platform. The user makes the decision. It's fully equitable and fully permissioned. Let's turn the page again, right? So now we're over in the cyber defense side of the industry, InfoSec. So we're looking at Cyber Defense Magazine. Their journey, similar to others, right? They had a very disjointed user experience when it came down to content availability to their audience. They had archive issues, which I'm assuming most of you listening or watching today have. A lot of those archive issues were just straight links to PDFs. I've seen some of you link to like more interactive HTML5 viewers, either or. There's no gate. There's no point of capture, not even an email address. So you're giving access to this content. You have no idea who these people are. And you certainly will never be able to forge a relationship or nurture that audience. But beyond that, you'll never be able to monetize that user either. Webinars, same idea as what we referenced before. In their case, they're sending people to go to webinar. Again, totally fine for their platform in terms of hosting webinars. The experience, that said, their forum technology, what it can and can't do, it's not really all that powerful. On the white paper side, they're using Wufoo. Wufoo, I'm saying this in a lovingly fashion, is that I would consider that to be a dumb form. Wufoo is designed for as lean of a form as possible with zero logic, zero predictive capabilities, zero corrective capabilities, very little anything. And there's a use case, I suppose, out in the world, but it tends to be B2B media tends not to be one of those. So afterwards, they've deployed the platform, all of their gated contents under one unique white labeled experience. They've standardized their data dictionary just like others. And yet again, that revenue stream comes up. So we'll take a look at what that means to them. Their numbers are getting impressive, right? So 64% of their users are automatically recognized for zero typing. What you're seeing on the right-hand side are some webinars that they're running. 30% of their users are receiving enriched predictive prefills, totaling 94% of their audience receiving a benefit of the optimized experience, and 24% of their users are immediately monetizing. So again, this is just found revenue, right? A lot of publishers where every penny counts. In some cases, you're talking well over 6 figures annually, simply by doing kind of what you would have done anyways, which was use a form to get people to register for content and then send them on their way. And that's a really powerful thing to think about there. Whereas if you could extract revenue from things that your audience already enjoyed doing, give them a better UX and give them some bonus content in the process, why not? And I believe we're gonna close out, actually, no, there's 2 more. So this is the AMA. This one's very traditionally aligned to a normal association type thought process, right? Where there was a little bit of ungated content and then a lot of content hidden behind their membership username and password. And so the frustration there was that not everyone that visits the AMA is a member. They're intrigued by the brand. It certainly has a ton of credibility, but they'd like to get access to content. For reasons unknown, they don't become members. So the thought was, well, what if Netline filled the gap there and created a new type of membership model whereby there's unknown users, there are full members, and then there's members in between where they become known by going through Netline predictive form, but we're also able to monetize those users immediately. And we're also able to use give those users that unified login experience that is slowly percolating out across every B2B website on the landscape. And let's dive into what that meant for them, right? So we got rid of the whole unified login around the username and password side of things and with Netline's solution. And that net new revenue stream was something completely new for them. turns out to be incredibly powerful for them. I think this is the highest percentage thus far that I've shared, that 46% of their users are automatically being recognized, no typing. 49% are receiving predictive pre-fills. 95% of the audience receiving an optimized experience. Yet 33% of those users are immediately converting. So if you're a publisher out there, do yourself a favor. Think about how many forms you process per month. Just period. It could be for any type of content: webinars, white papers, case studies, virtual events, newsletter opt-ins. Throw those numbers into an Excel doc, and 33% of those folks would monetize. What would that mean for you? Just think about that for a moment, because I know most of you are processing, if not tens of thousands of registrations per year, but usually hundreds of thousands, if not some clearing millions. And Business Management Journal, Business Management Daily. So what we're looking at here is they had a primary focus on just capturing email addresses. That's it. The problem with capturing email addresses, and I think I touched on the concept loosely up front, is that you don't know a lot about a user. If you want to go pay for enriched services, you can. I suppose you can do some progressive profiling and keep asking that user questions over time to learn little tidbits about them, but you don't have to do that. And if you don't do that, your targeting and audience segmentation is brutal, right? There's not too much to do. You can look at the email address, you can look at maybe the IP address and detect where they were at in the world, and you can look at the content that they initially created or requested to understand what they might be interested in the future. Beyond that, there's not too much to do until you learn more. And again, there was zero revenue associated to those email captures. Is the classic case of, let's get the data in, let's hope we can understand something about these users, and then hope to convert them into revenue downstream. Obviously, the case was made to really flip that model on its head. They've successfully done that, so kudos. They've now consolidated all gated content behind NetLine-powered forms. They're starting to capture incredibly rich profiles, 15+ fields of data on every registrant, even though a lot of those users might not be providing any of that because they're already recognized. In some cases, they might be providing 3 fields. Standardized their data dictionary again, so now they've got a structured data set beyond just a list of email addresses. And then again, that revenue model comes into play. And so we're getting to a point, and you'll see this, where we're almost at 100% of the publisher's audience received an optimized experience. This was the highest one that we've shared today. So 81% of their users are automatically being recognized for zero typing. That's astounding. 17% of their users are receiving enriched profiles. And my assumption is, if we reran this exact session in a few months, those numbers, the 81 is going to be over 90. And obviously that 17 is going to be less than 10. And so what you're getting to right now is 98% of their audiences are fully optimized. And 22% of them are immediately being monetized. Again, they didn't have that idea in the past. It was capture email addresses and hope that we can do something with them in the future. So we're really passionate about this because, and I was talking to Matt about this before the session, it feels like we're doing good things, not just for publishers in the sense of making them operationally more efficient and time management and ad ops more efficient, but we're offering your audience a far more compelling user experience that's very frictionless. But most importantly, that revenue model is extracting revenue in a way that you otherwise wouldn't be getting, doing what you would have already been doing. And so it feels meaningful to me, at least, that we're contributing back to the marketplace in a way that hopefully helps all of you thrive and course correct and continuously redefine who you are, what you do, and how you're serving not only your audience of today, but your audiences of tomorrow. So quick video here, just detailing how it works visually. And so this is an example of a user entering their email address, and just by that email address and their name, it's pulling all of those values in dynamically, leading to a 60% reduction in data entry for your first time registrations. At that point, and this is baseline, 71% of audiences are immediately recognized for zero typing. At that point, this will continue on loop, but it's all about maximizing that touch point with the audience and maximizing conversions. And so my goal here today was really to spend a bit of time around those case studies, not keep you too long. I realize like everybody's totally webinared out, and I'm on too many of them as it is as well, so you probably don't want to hear from me anymore. And just plant the seed that, you know, if you find that use case of being in a position of lacking first-party data or not getting enough of it quick enough, and or lacking the ability to translate that first-party data and those audience touch points into repeatable and meaningful revenue streams, there's a no-cost platform freely available for you to use, and that was exactly what we've covered here today, and we'd love to chat. So I'm going to turn this back to Matt. Let me know if you've got any questions, or if anybody in the audience does as well.
David, thanks very much. Folks, we are going to open it up for Q&A right now. Participants are in a listen-only mode, but you can type in your questions via the Q&A tab in your toolbar. Go ahead, type those in, and then we can address those in the order they come in. David, I think it'd be helpful if you just reiterate the business model around this and the cost for publishers. Can you touch on that briefly, please?
Sure. Yeah, so when I say it's no cost, it's legitimately no cost. The reason for that and that revenue model play comes into fruition is that as you're presenting a white labeled form to your audience is typing in their own information, all of that first party data. We are filling in the voids of the first party data that they don't need to type in. And then simultaneously doing a lookup across the entire platform, saying who is actively promoting content that's specifically targeting the first party values that that user just provided. And so that content is made recommended or recommended down on the bottom of the form as additional content that that user might be relevant and or interested to receive prior to hitting submit. And that gets back to that Amazon checkout idea, right? Which is Amazon says, hey, you've got this TV, you might want to buy this surround sound system. They're looking at it from a binary perspective of people buy this or they don't. We are looking at it much more granularly, saying that this content not only could be of interest to that user, but it also meets the criteria of the person who wrote the content, right? They're looking to reach managers and above in an automotive industry within a company of 10,000 plus employees and greater. So if a user decides to take that content, we receive revenue from that and we share revenue with the publisher. You can turn that off. That's a paid feature if you want to turn that off, and that's something for another day. But yeah, the stack is free to go with that revenue model in play.
All right, terrific. David, we've got a couple questions from the audience, and I'll preface this by saying we actually have a strong Canadian representation within AMP Network. And first question is from one of our friends from the Great White North. Does Netline have the same information available for Canadians?
We do. We tend to be pretty strong in North America. EU, we're getting better. I would say our larger challenge tends to be when you're going into smaller organizations. The smaller the organization, less so the region, but the smaller the company size, it's very hard to do that well. And for a number of reasons, I suppose we could get better at it, but on the flip side, there's not a lot of marketers or media companies who pay much attention in trying to monetize those extremely small business users. So it's a balance, right? Where we try to invest our time in getting better on the data science side of things and data integrity side of things, clearly with a direct correlation to where the revenue is in the marketplace. And so if things are changing, then we obviously pivot based upon how that changes. But yeah, to answer your question, we feel quite confident on that.
David, we've got a follow-up question to that. Does Netline keep the audience data entered?
Yeah, so there's part of the contract. If the user is going through the form and the user does not select any offers that we are powering, so those additional pieces of content, we cannot touch that data. It's not ours, it's only yours. That's contractually bound. Every publisher that I showed you today is signed off on that agreement. We can't do anything with that. If that user has actually said, oh yeah, there's another piece of content here that Netline's powering, they don't know it's Netline, but that's who's powering that additional recommendation. I'm getting that. I'll take that ebook. At that point, that data becomes Netline's because Netline has to share that data to that vendor who created that content. That's our role, right? We're the conduit. And because of us being the conduit, that's the revenue stream for us, which is also the revenue stream for the publisher. So each one of those slides where I was saying they were able to get anywhere from 20 to 40% of their users to immediately monetize, that's all funded by those other companies who are paying to try to reach those types of users. They just don't know where it's happening, right? So no one can go in and say, I want to buy audience off of this specific site. That's not transparently available to them. It's all algorithmically driven behind the scenes.
All right, thank you. David, can you talk a little bit about who you're actually working with on the publishing side? This seems like it's something tailor-made for audience marketing, audience development. You name dropped that in the presentation, but it also seems to touch on other areas, digital media, data, UX for those publishers who have that. Who are you really working with directly, and who needs to be involved to make this a success?
Yeah, personally, I prefer a chief digital officer, chief strategy officer, or a CEO to make the decision to bring us aboard. We've had different levels of folks bring us in, depending upon their authority and credibility in the company. It works or it doesn't. The main hurdles that you'll see, and anytime we're going in, look, we're going with a tech stack that typically runs circles around things that are already built inside that company, but they've spent a lot of time, blood, sweat, and tears, and money building. There's someone there angry that you're replacing their baby. And so if it doesn't come in from above by saying, look, here's what's at play. Everyone's getting better. Our users are getting a better experience. Our teams are getting better operationally or more operationally efficient because we can focus on doing other things instead of manual tasks. We don't need to constantly commit to a product lifecycle where we're trying to band-aid solutions when Netline's doing a full Scrum sprint every 45 days to the platform that every publisher benefits from. Like, there's just a lot of reasons for this beyond just the idea of having forms. And so with that in mind, you tend to need to be someone who can see the big picture and enforce the big picture. We love it, actually, if someone very junior comes in and points out how much manual nonsense they do per day or per week and what they'd rather do, which is one odd circumstance of us coming in low and the person's like, wait a second, all the reporting gets automated and I don't need to do any of that? Well, that's like 3 days of my week. Normally just manually doing stuff. And so if that person can advocate for that, they look brilliant, first of all, and then they have ideas of what they'd be more beneficial doing for the company rather than just doing busy work. So audience development tends to be a tough spot because they tend not to have the authority in a lot of organizations to roll out tech. And so they tend to be kind of self-contained. And again, it gets back to that legacy view of like, you need to grow audience, but you're either a cost center or I'm not funding those efforts either. So just try to arbitrage your way to audience growth. And it's hard for some folks to build clout organizationally to drive influence of a project like this.
All right. Folks, we've only got a couple minutes left. If you have questions, please submit them now. David, as a follow-up to that, can you talk a little bit about what publishers need to be prepared to do to successfully integrate this? I think we've seen a lot of publishers take on new technologies, often not that successful. So what do you need to be prepared to do to make this a success?
Yeah, this one's the easiest. It's promote. That's it. So we have services and we do this for free as well. So if you've got a ton of legacy gated content living on some archaic web page or form technology, we realize the only way that you win by using our technology is to have that content powered by Netline Form. So we'll actually suck all of that in, get that hosted inside your environment. The only thing we ask you to do is drive traffic like you normally would back to those pages. That's really it. You don't need to do anything other than that. You can go crazy overthinking, sales strategies and how the company might sell lead gen. In the future, we're happy to guide you and or offer consultative services around that. I find that a lot of folks that we talk to in the industry have that figured out, right? It's just the underlying infrastructure is not so good. And so if we can help them really weaponize what they do good and make the back end stuff that much more efficient, rich, and exhaust a ton more revenue, it's a phenomenal win for everybody. So yeah, I'm not underselling this, but like realistically, you can go live in a couple days and actually see real data flowing through the system, real revenue, and so on. It's very simple.
David, question from the audience. Does the platform handle all compliance and privacy requirements, CASL, GDPR, CCPA, et cetera?
It does. And we actually go one step further in that if you feel like all of our system level either disclosure statements and or consent statements aren't exactly what your own legal team would like there to be, you can add those too. So it's completely flexible in that way. So if you want to go over the top, where your legal team is super committed to a specific phrase, so be it. Yeah, add it, and it's all part of the interface. Easily done. Not a big deal.
I'm just going to throw in a sidebar here that this is really coming to the forefront again. I think a lot of publishers prepared for things like GDPR, didn't see anything immediately come of that and kind of put that on the back burner. But we're starting to see B2B publishers being targeted for lawsuits. We were actually reached out to a lot of our member CEOs this week, but there's opportunistic lawsuits coming out. They're targeting publishers for supposed violations, state violations, at least in the US. And these are basically nuisance lawsuits. These are like the ambulance chasers you see on late night TV. They're going to sue you. They're going to hope to settle out of court. They don't necessarily want to go to trial. But this is starting to become a real issue. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some people on this call today whose organizations are involved in this right now. But it is a problem. And again, we've got some resources in-house with our legal and also our policy division. So feel free to follow up with me as well if you're starting to see those types of issues.
Yeah, and there's one thing to even think about there, Matt, which is the transfer of data, right? Like, let's say you captured it all correctly and fully consented. There's a lot of companies behind the scenes that are passing Excel docs back and forth. A, the users probably would be mortified, but B, in most jurisdictions now, that's technically definitely morally wrong, and in some cases now legally wrong. And so, our system went to a full username and password accessibility for PII, so that you can't simply be passing around CSV files to a client that are unsecure, and anyone inside that company could gain access to it. Like, these are the things everyone on the session and beyond need to be thinking about. It's not just that upfront gaining consent, but it's all the downstream data use, who has access to it, how it's transferred, how it's stored. Very important.
All right, excellent. Folks, if you do have a question, please go ahead and get it in now. We're almost out of time. David, I've got one last question from me, and we're talking a lot about first-party data. This seems to really be becoming a kind of a catch-all term in terms of knowing the customer, who the customer is. I'm just curious if there's any kind of hierarchy emerging around first-party data. Is there something within that whole classifications that we really need to be focused on?
So it's funny. So I've seen some folks on the programmatic side, I'm not going to throw their names out, start to say the phrase zero-party data, which is kind of akin to monitoring your own audience's behavior on your own website, still without their consent. And I would say the whole genesis of the first-party data movement. Now, first-party data obviously has been a phrase that's been around for ages. But what it means today in the marketplace is it's code for consent, right? So the users should be doing this in a permission fashion and a knowledge-based fashion so that they understand what's happening. Because if that's not happening, then we're going to be in the same bind again 5 years from now, just because we all started calling it zero-party data. And then it turns out every governing body and every browser said, yeah, well, we didn't know you're going to do that. We didn't know you're just going to start stripping that data out and then modeling it off of that and selling off of that and so on. Using anonymous data sets and then trying to target beyond the scope of your own web property still is morally in breach of basically where the entire web is going. And so whether legally it's a breach yet, most likely it's not. But if you're paying attention, right, the users have to have an equitable experience and feel like they are part of what's happening. And if not, then you're most likely not operating in first-party data and or even having first-party data as kind of like your core mantra.
Great advice, and that's a good note to end on. David, thank you very much. This is terrific information. Appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Folks, I want to thank our audience. Thank you for joining us, and great questions from the audience as well. Like I said, this session is being recorded, and then we will follow up with a replay for everyone shortly. Thank you, David, and thanks again to our audience. Take care.
Thank you.